Hi, my name is Dr. Asia Eaton. I'm a psychological scientist and public psychologist, and this is Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. In this podcast, we invite human rights defenders to teach and learn from brain and behavioral scientists about how we can all use science to do human rights work that is more efficient and impactful.
Welcome, everyone, to the Mindbridge Podcast. It is February 6th, 2026, and today we have human rights defender Tiffany Rodgers and psychological scientist Taewon Kim. We're going to be talking about fair labor, labor rights, or what is known in psychology as decent work, and I'm super excited. Tiffany is Fair Labor Association's Vice President of Research and Development. Over the last decade, her career at FLA includes 24 accreditation evaluations of FLA companies in the fashion and manufacturing industries, and the execution of standards that pushed responsible purchasing practices to the forefront of human rights due diligence. She champions FLA's award-winning Fair Compensation Program, which requires FLA companies to measure progress toward living wages. Her expertise incorporates labor rights, living wage, and responsible purchasing and production practices to innovate standards and tools that improve corporate practices, factory conditions, and worker well-being. She holds bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Delaware, studying under Dr. Marcia Dixon, co-founder of the Better Buying Institute. She resides outside of Chicago, Illinois, and in her free time, enjoys spending time with her dog, dancing, and creating art. Welcome, Tiffany. And we have Dr. Taewon Kim, an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Florida. She obtained her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Houston and completed her predoctoral clinical internship at the Colorado State University Health Network. Her research focus is economic marginalization. Specifically, she investigates how structural forces distribute capital and other resources to access work opportunities, leading to quote-unquote bad jobs, social class experiences, and a variety of mental and physical outcomes. In her free time, Taewon enjoys being in the water and is going to swim with the manatees this weekend, we just found out. Welcome, Taewon.
Thank you so much for having us.
So let's get started with you, Tiffany. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in work on labor rights and fairness?
Yeah, thank you, Asia. Thanks for having me on Mindbridge Podcast today. It's very exciting to be here and to talk with Taewon on labor rights. So how I got started in this work, when I was a young girl, I loved fashion, wanted to be a fashion designer for a while, but I also was doing some volunteering within my church group and would spend summers in Juarez, Mexico, providing Sunday school for children at a small church in Juarez. And that's kind of the first time I had experienced poverty and poverty outside of the United States. And those experiences always kind of stuck with me on what it means to show love and kindness to people in different conditions and how you can support people. And so I went to college, focused on fashion design, graduated and started working for Tracy Reese in New York, and kind of lived the dream for a bit, doing runway shows and designing collections. During that time, President Obama was elected, and we were dressing Michelle Obama, and it was truly the dream. But I always had this itch in the back of my mind on, what was happening in the factories that we were working with and what I could do to improve the fashion industry. At that time, I had already an understanding of some of the labor rights issues in the garment industry. I then decided to go back to grad school and study under Marcia Dixon and really focus on corporate social responsibility within the fashion industry. And that's how I came to the Fair Labor Association. I started as an accreditation assistant, and because I had such a strong experience in working in design, but not just in design, working for a smaller designer. So understanding all of the different purchasing and production processes that go into making clothing, the tech packs, the specs, having all of the samples, all of the fittings, all of that experience really helped me establish some of my expertise on responsible purchasing practices, which at the time the Fair Labor Association was developing standards on. And I, just kind of stayed with the FLA, ran with all of the interesting work that we could be doing, all of the experiences in working with brands and their social compliance programs to improve their factory conditions. And eventually found myself working on living wages as well, and how that intersects with purchasing practices. So that's just some of my background.
Thank you so much. You talked a little bit about wages, but tell us, what does justice as it relates to labor mean to you? Is it just wages? Is it more than that? What does it include?
Yeah, I would say wages is a big component of justice and labor rights. It's one of the most important ones, but it's not the only one. I like to try to humanize what it means to focus on labor rights and justice and labor rights, because most of us have jobs, most of us need a job to live, and we all deserve jobs that ensure our safety and our well-being. We all should be paid an amount that allows us to afford our basic needs, have some savings, have a family, a roof over our head. And I feel that we often lose sight of that sometimes. Sometimes we feel that you only deserve those things if you're working as hard as you can. And I think we all need to take a step back and remember we're all human. We're all doing the best that we can. We're all showing up to our jobs, trying to do our best, and not every day is going to look like our best, because we're all managing something on our plate outside of the workplace. And so with justice and labor rights, it's about finding jobs and employers that really recognize and respect the needs that people have. And for me, when we have billionaires who are looking to be trillionaires, and yet we have a huge living wage gap globally. It's really about right sizing what it means to have a job and be compensated for that job to afford a decent life.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'll turn now to Taewon. Tell me a little bit about what you study in plain language and how you got involved in it.
The stuff that I'm doing is to identify what bad jobs are like and what makes people get a bad job and what might be happening if people get a bad job. And probably the most important thing that I want to highlight here is that we do have a myth thinking that as long as people have qualifications, capabilities, knowledge, and skills, and they're going to have pretty good job, like okay job per se, but that is not necessarily the case. I feel like the structure actually pushes people to have limited options around what they could do in terms of getting a job. So that is one of the main focus of my research area. And the reason why I started this work is probably because of my personal stories, my parents' stories. So my parents worked so hard to make a living, but their jobs cannot be described as career per se. Like their pay was really low and their jobs are very socially stigmatized in my back home country, which is South Korea. So I really appreciate their hardworking things, work ethics, and at the same time, I know how they have been abused and bullied by society and system so much. And that also happened when I get a job. So after I graduate my college, I got a job as a marketer first. I mean, I did it because I wanted to go to the graduate program in counseling psychology, but I didn't have lots of money. And I knew that my family member can't afford those things. And I had my own financial responsibility to take care of my family members. So I had to take any job that I can take to make a living. So that job paid me really well, even though I didn't have like ND or JD, something like that. At least the salary was really good. But I mean, I experienced lots of discrimination, sexism, like all the stuff was going on. And of course, I didn't feel that was okay. I was not humanized at the time. And at the same time, I had to stay there because I had to make a living and financially support my family members. So I stayed there maybe several years more. And then I feel like at least I saved some money. So maybe with this money, I could do something that I want. So that was why I decided to the counseling psychology program. And in counseling psychology, career counseling is a big part of that, like how we can support people to get a good job. But even that career counseling, we named it as career, but I knew that my parents have never had a job that could be named as career. So I was always frustrated because all the theories and research findings have never explained my parents' work and my previous job experiences before. So I felt that this is not enough. So I gotta do something different. So that was why I started to do a little different thing that might could come across as sociology or something like that. So I'm a little detouring those things, but yeah, that's how I started this work.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Tiffany, which is how you would define fair labor. I mean, I heard you talk about opportunity and choice. I heard you talk about discrimination and fair
Mhm.
treatment. What is fair labor to you?
That is a good question. I feel like even entering a job, I feel that we need to have at least fairly distributed resources per se, so that we can have some power, resources, and privilege to feel that, oh, I could take this job instead of feeling forced to get this job. So even before talking about fair labor per se, I feel that the system should have been more fair enough to everybody. So I feel like is the access to resources and power, how can I say, like fairly distributed? How has it been shaped by all the structures and discrimination per se? And if those things have been pretty fairly distributed, and then maybe we can talk about how fair the job is. And of course, it can capture the pay and the safety issues around the job situation, or does that job give us some time to rest? Or does that job give us some health insurance? So we can consider some other components on top of that. And also, does that job give us some bargaining power, like collective power, that we can speak up if something bad is coming around? So there are some other components that we can talk around on top of talking about the fair pay per se.
Tiffany, I saw you nodding, especially when Taewon was talking about collective power. What were you thinking as she was sharing?
Taewon, it's so great to have your expertise here. And I was just thinking as you were talking through how important it is to have time to rest, health insurance, bargaining power. Like these are all part of our standards at the Fair Labor Association around, making sure that workers have at least a day off every 7 days, making sure that they don't have to be forced to work overtime if they can't. And yeah, having health insurance and other social benefits to support them is part of the standards that we're trying to uphold at the Fair Labor Association, but especially on bargaining power and fair labor and decent work. It's so important that workers feel empowered that they can use their voice and they can raise when there are issues, whether it's, issues around discrimination or harassment or abuse, or even just issues that would help them, do their job a little better, be a little safer. And so those are all areas that we're working on at the FLA, and I just really appreciated how you framed all that from your experience.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you point out the part because I feel that when something bad is happening at the job place, mostly people's immediate reaction is, I gotta suck it up. And then they start to like blame themselves. Like, I could have been more patient and I don't have power to speak up. I'm scared about a backlash from the employer. Am I going to be punished by the system or am I going to be interpersonally bullied? Something like that. And we really need to empower people. Of course, navigating those things is really hard. And at the same time, if we start talking about this by having more people, then they could be more empowered and then navigate the system in a better way, I think. So yeah, collective power is so important because just we are so small individuals, but once we gather together, then things might be more heard and seen by the employer. So that's what I really wanted to highlight. And at the same time, capitalism, neoliberalism don't like those things. So yeah, we are in a pull and push position right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I especially as a woman and wanting to please people, when you start in a job, and as I remember when I was, just starting in entry level jobs, you just want to do what you can to do good at that job You don't want to raise a lot of issues. You want to get promoted and be easy to work with. But you find if you can't feel comfortable or trust the workplace or your supervisor to be able to communicate, things that are challenging to you or things that should be better, that workplace will never change. And often that leads to disappointment or burnout or even worse issues like harassment and abuse that, just you continue to put up with. And so it's, to me, I think a lot of the work we do, I relate to garment workers in a way that I understand them. I've worked in, with factories for a long time. I've sewn a lot of clothes and I understand how physically demanding and challenging it is. And then, just relating it to my own experience as a woman trying to, grow my career. It is not easy. There are so many challenges we go through. And when we talk about fair labor and decent work, we do have to be empathetic to, the large groups of people in factory work or farm work or mining work, where it's very physically demanding. And you were mentioning, looking at bad jobs. And to me, it's around understanding that for that person, these jobs in some countries are the first kind of industrialized jobs that people have. It's the first time they've ever had a formal employer, or first time they've ever had to go to a building or wear shoes for their job. And so it's really trying to understand, like meeting them where they're at and recognizing, yes, this job is hard. And there's a lot of challenging things about it, but for them, it's a huge opportunity for them to continue to grow, their first time at a career or be able to support their family better, or sometimes they're moving countries so they can send money back to their family members as well.
Can I chime in a little bit? uh, because I wanted to highlight two things. The first thing is, women have been socially located so in a different way compared to men in the industry, because we have been so, how can I say, we have faced lots of layers of discrimination per se, or intersectional marginalization even when getting a job, but particularly when they are in more like male dominant fields, including manufacturing workers. The manufacturing fields, the dynamics is getting way more trickier, and it's way more challenging for them to navigate the system around how I could speak up when something bad comes up. And at the same time, they do have like different social norms that they have to navigate, including like work and family interface, something like that. So that's there. And at the same time, the research shows that women have a little different strategies in terms of social advocate work. So they are not likely to advocate for themselves, but they are more patient at advocating for other people. So it seems like for women, it's way more helpful to facilitate a collective action. Like if we just encourage one single woman saying that, hey, you experienced something bad going on in your company, so just go talk to your boss, and they're less likely to do so because they're so scared of backlash. They're thinking of what might be happening if something bad happens, what would be happening if other people think that I'm making up the story, but they are more than happy to support other women. So maybe that dynamic and knowing that dynamic might be a little helpful for you to navigate those things if women employees are talking about their concerns.
Absolutely, Taewon. It's super important, especially when we're looking at gender-based violence and harassment. It's very challenging for women to come forward on those kind of issues. It's something that especially the fashion industry struggles with, and social compliance we're struggling with, because there's a whole industry of auditing factories, sending in auditors to check the issues. Those auditors aren't going to find issues on gender-based violence because women are not going to, be ready to bring that up in a worker interview. And there aren't going to be, records on that or anything like that. And when it comes to this issue, you really need someone dedicated, someone conducting an investigation. But even then, if they can only find one person who will speak to it, it's hard to remediate or gain the confidence and trust to be able to address that issue with the employer or management. And so it is about collectively finding cases, building trust, across a group of women to be able to address a larger systemic and cultural issue that really needs to be addressed, to make the workplace safer and better for the women there.
I hear both of you talking so much about structures like capitalism and forms of inequality like sexism, racism, classism. With how prevalent all of this is in the US, is there anywhere here that is doing this right? Are there any organizations that are practicing fair labor really well? And if not in the US, outside the US?
It's a great question, Asia. And I don't know if Taewon and I have the answer to that. I can take a stab at it. I mean, I think there are some countries where social benefits are maybe better, and recognizing more equitable benefits for women, where there's, mandatory maternity leave and other support for childcare, that can help a lot. Taewon, I think some of your research has touched on decent work and meaningful work, and I think we can sometimes assume that those in employers where you're doing meaningful work, more higher salaries, long-term contracts, or just being able to grow at a workplace, they are better. But from my perspective, when capitalism really influences a lot of the global dynamics that we have, it's really challenging to say that anyone's doing it perfectly, because so much of our society and our culture is driven by profit. And, I think part of what keeps me in this work is this dream where we could just recognize that, we're all people. And yes, money is important. We all need money to afford our lives. But can we just recognize that we're human, and we can't always be putting profit over people. And I think we've been doing it for decades at this point. And sure, there have been great advancements in technology. There's been great advancements in financial investment and things like that. But we're also looking at a world that is somewhat falling apart because we're not protecting the people that are doing some of the really essential jobs that we need. And we're also not protecting the planet that gives us the resources to do all of the amazing things that we have done, so far, with advancements in technology and advancements in resources and global trade and things like that. So I don't know if there's a great answer to this. Taewon, please chime in.
I stay with the same frustration and powerlessness that Tiffany carries right now. I do have two thoughts. Maybe one thought is more about responding to Asia's question. I mean, I don't think there's a utopia exist in this world, but at least I can think of an example in South Korea. I think decent work, that is the concepts that has been created by the ILO, International Labor Organization, like developed back in 1999, something like that, around 30 years ago. That concept emerged from the organization. And one of the biggest component of them defining decent work is whether the job gives people access to healthcare. But the thing is, that feels so conditional, because I feel like physical well-being and mental well-being is the human right that should not be conditioned by our job situation or job condition or whatever. At least South Korea, we do have really good medical system. So we don't necessarily need to work per se if we want to see a doctor. And if we want to see a doctor, we can meet them maybe in 5 minutes. And the cost is only like $3. So it seems like obviously there could have been a better system, but seems like people don't believe that the better system might exist. So it seems like it's almost like something is there, but people don't know whether that exists outside of their scope. So that is one frustration that I have had when living in the United States, because people only consider that the medical care system should be associated with the job condition, which doesn't make sense, because there are lots of, for example, gig working conditions that are not associated with the medical insurance at all. And I'm a little concerned about how people get their medical concerns to be treated, to be honest, at this point. So yeah, at least something is there. At least some human right could be preserved by not labor system per se, but more of the governmental regulation per se. So there was one thought that I had. Another thought around the fear around capitalism or neoliberalism is those system is so scary because it gives us the strategy about how to make money, how to prevent any cost, like all about the money game. But at the same time, it also dictates our moral value system per se. Like we are getting more so focused on efficiency or self-interest, and we are getting more detached from the common good for society in general. And those are so applicable to individuals and employers. So they're just so focused on dehumanizing people because they just want to make some profit. So we became a kind of unit for their labor instead of being humanized. So I think that is the scary point. Like capitalism and neoliberalism doesn't only dictate the market policies per se, but that also shape our perspectives around humans. I think that is the biggest concern.
There's no utopia, but there are better examples out there. What can workplaces do to humanize their employees in today's day and age? What can they do to move conditions closer to decent work and fair labor?
The first and most important piece of that is having worker voice inform the workplace, whether that's through a workers' committee, a union, or just open communication between workers and management. I would strongly advocate it should be a union, but that's not always possible everywhere. And so for me, employers need to understand if they're hiring humans, they need human voices informing, what it means to work at that place. I think we've all experienced at some point, trying to provide feedback on wanting to make your job a little better or make the workplace a little better, and it has been taken very personally, or the person receiving that feedback feels that they're personally responsible for certain things, and perhaps they shut down. And I think especially with younger generations, we want to feel like we're being heard. And so when managers, and especially top management, can take the time to think, okay, how can I make sure the feedback from my entry level positions, are getting to me in some way, shape, or form, so that I can make these jobs better, so I can make the company more efficient, stabilize employment, and not have a lot of turnover, and things like that. All of that is connected. Yeah, it takes a little time, and you need to be emotionally mature to make sure that you can have productive dialogue with everyone, and there will be times where ideas are just too much and you can't do it. But to really humanize a workplace, you need to have that worker voice integrated, and not just asking, what do you think about the pizza party we had? It's about, like, we're having a review of the employee handbook. Where should we be making improvements? Does everyone understand the compensation or the leave policies? If you don't, where can we make that clearer? How can we make it work better for you, so that we're all understanding things the same way? I find a lot of that happens at the Fair Labor Association. We're not perfect, we're not a utopia at all, but we do have open dialogue across teams, and from entry level to top management, because we are trying to practice what we preach. We don't get it perfect every time, but if we're having an issue, we are trying to resolve it and trying to take feedback so that we can integrate it. We're having a discussion around gender equity policies within our organization, because I lead our gender equity work plan. I have a gender team, that we're looking at our own standards and the work we can do with garment and farm workers. But of course, we take a minute and reflect back on where we could be doing it better within our own organization.
Maybe just something that I could add, even though my perspectives are the same thing, is, I mean, of course, me as a counseling psychologist or therapist, I really value empathy. And probably through the open dialogue, I hope people can be more empathetic, more understanding of what could be look like, or how they could feel like if we are not treated as a human. So that could be the ultimate aspirational goal. And at the same time, I understand that neoliberalism, capitalism, those kind of things have shaped our perspectives around humans. So I also understand, if employers are not interested in increasing their empathic understanding or something like that. I get it. Probably we just as a psychologist or therapist value those things. I get it. But at the same time, I also want to argue that human right is not the opposite term of cost and gain analysis per se. Like if our employees are getting more fatigued, tired, if they feel that they don't get enough raise, enough pay, if they feel that the working environment is so shitty, then of course their working productivity would become lower and there might be some mistakes going on, or they could do some strikes, or there might be some errors going on. So it seems like something would be there that the employers have to manage. So maybe we can argue that employers can do this work as almost like risk management per se. So I want them to consider human right as almost cost and gain analysis part, because if they miss these things and employees will be sad, they're fatigued, they might be injured, and they're going to leave the job, and then they need to hire another person. It takes a lot of money, time, and retraining. Those things are so expensive. So all the costing is also involved in human right. So we might need to translate that human right is translatable to their benefits per se, if they don't want to be empathetic per se. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Taewon. I mean, there is such a business case to treating your employees better. If you're not paying them well and they're leaving for higher wages, higher salaries to a competitor, you're not saving money by keeping the wages low, and you're wasting a lot of money on turnover, onboarding, offboarding, poor efficiency because you're onboarding new people to jobs that they, take 3 to 6 months to get good at. It's one of the cases that we try to raise when it comes to living wage. It's in general just treating employees better. If employees are leaving, it's costly to the business. And the real simple solution is just treating people with respect and dignity and making sure that what you're paying them can cover their basic needs. Because if it can't, then they're also going to struggle in the workplace. If they cannot afford, the home, the food, the basic needs that they need, and, that's draining their energy to figure out how to constantly afford that week to week, they're not going to be performing as well as you want them to in any sort of job. And often they're going to find other jobs that, keep them up at night, stress them out. And so I often really battle with what capitalism has done, because it's kind of, in my opinion, just taking away from where there could be better gains if we just treated people better and just emphasize the treatment of people as much as we emphasize the importance of profit and revenue.
Exactly, because I can understand that. Like, it's so easy for employers to minimize the power of humans or power of employees. And at the same time, at the end of the day, we are humans who have our own strength and agency. For example, we can change the job, but it seems like employers don't have the idea that we could leave their job. So it seems like recognizing our power that we have as a human, the potentials agency, that's just so important. And then we need to translate that idea to the employers, saying that, hey, we do have strengths, we do have agency, we do have power. Your employees can leave your job all the time, and that will cost a lot of money.
I mean, it's tough though. Not everyone can leave, right? So sometimes you might just see counterproductive work behaviors, right? People start to fake their hours or bully other employees, or they take home a ream of paper and a box of pencils and they don't care, right? There's other ways you pay. So we are starting to get to the end of our time together. And I want to ask you, Tiffany, what are some things that you want scientists who are working on fair labor to know from your on the ground perspective?
So I focus my work on living wages. I do other things as well on gender equity and just transition and other human rights areas, but my specialty is on living wages. And there's a few things. I think one, from a business perspective, there is a lot of challenges in collecting clean data to measure the living wage gap. And so I would love for scientists to understand that it's an area that they have great expertise on, collecting data from representative samples and, defining that very well and conducting great analysis on it. But when businesses are trying to do that themselves, they're not equipped often with the expertise that scientists have or even the resources that they can. And so we've worked really hard to develop tools that our companies can scale. But what I would also love for scientists to understand, especially in this area and economists especially, is I would love to see how we can find solutions to this problem of capitalism that we have and how it is really putting downward pressure on wages, on people. I think there are very few economists that can envision a world where we close the living wage gap. And at the Fair Labor Association, we're really lucky to work with the Anchor Research Institute that develops the Global Living Wage Coalition estimates that we use because they can envision a world where we close the gap, and they're trying to put information out there that's free and publicly available to show, what a living wage could look like in different countries and in different parts of the world. I would love for more scientists to embrace that vision and help us get to scalable solutions. There's governance solutions, policy solutions, and regulations that we need to get to, but they're often handcuffed with this perception of if we raise wages in one country, fashion business will go to other countries that haven't raised their wages, and so then we won't be able to continue to attract the business and so there's all of these things that are working against it. And so I wish we could come together and understand, like, if we all do this incrementally together, we all commit to it together, then we won't have this, competitive nature that, capitalism really has provided this environment for. Global politics is more complicated than just that, but that's what I would love, from a science and research perspective, if we could start to model that and bring that to the forefront instead of just just kind of noting all of the challenges and recognizing that from an economy perspective, we have to get to solutions of scale, and that is often, roadblocks that we have to get through. I would love to see more positive thinking in that area.
Oh, that's so important. I think that holds for all of psychology and neurosciences. Can we imagine better possible futures instead of just noting all of the problems? How can we think big and be brave about a more just future? Taewon, I'll leave you with the last word. Is there anything else you want to contribute to the conversation? Anything left unsaid?
I just wrote down the 3 points that Tiffany shared with us so that I can keep reminded about this. I mean, creating a good tool to understand what fair pay could look like is so important. And I feel like subjectivity, I'm not sure whether Tiffany, you incorporate that part as an indicator when you measure income, but I feel like subjectivity is so important. So what I'm saying by that is, so I live in college town, which name is Gainesville. I mean, not fancy, not popular, just middle of nowhere in Florida. We are just surrounded by the swamps. If people just make 40K in Gainesville, then that should be enough to make a living. But that's not livable if you live in California or New York. But the thing is, when we measure income, we mostly focus on objective indicators like the average of the income levels or something like that, instead of thinking about the contextual factors going on. So me as a psychologist, I always argue that whenever we want to measure income or social class indicators, we really need to incorporate these subjective experiences that our participants have. But of course, those things are not that consistent with economist perspective per se, because they're more leaning toward using the big data or panel data out there. So I see the not complete perspective, but inconsistent perspective around how we can conceptualize money or income or fair pay per se. So for that, I understand the frustration that you have. Not many economists are that interested in working with this thing, or the languages are different, or perspectives are different. I wish that we could have more interdisciplinary collaboration, because I know that a lot of economists are just more focused on quantitative data per se. I mean, I'm also a kind of quantitative researcher, but I also incorporate lots of qualitative work as well, because I feel that that's how we really truly appreciate or understand the nuances that the numbers don't capture per se. So I wish we can bring some economists to our field trip together and then literally show the reality of the world just to see how the objective indicators sometimes don't make sense to understand the real people's experiences. So that is the first thing. And the other stuff around the global thing, like even factories, I mean, even if we standardize our fair pay in a specific country, they could move on to somewhere else because the globalization is going on and they use that for their own benefit. I wish, I mean, it's more of the aspirational perspective. I wish we do have the global international organization that could really do enforcement. Like ILO, those organizations are more giving us some aspirational direction, but they don't do enforce anything per se. So I wish there could be an organization that could do those work, but that's more of the ideal world. So that was what I thought when I heard from Tiffany. The other stuff that I can add is when we just work with employees, I mean, me as a therapist, it's also really important to externalize their stress onto a little bigger structure. Because whenever they experience those things, like, oh, my job doesn't pay me very well, or I experienced sexual harassment at the workplace, their immediate response is to just blame themselves or individualize the issue just within themselves. And if we help them find these issues are not mine, not personal things, it's not because I'm not qualified, it's not because I'm a bad person, it's not because of my fault, but it's more because of how society treats us, then I think that is the important moment that they started to feel empowered, start navigating the other options out there. A lot of research actually shows that if employees have more zoomed out perspective, like critically understand how society is like and what they can do, then that really gives them some power to try to solve the issue per se. So maybe there was something that I wanted to add as a therapist perspective.
Thank you both so much. We could talk all day, but I want to be respectful of your time. I'll just say I heard you both repeatedly talk about centering the voices of workers, whether that's through unions or whether that's through qualitative research. I heard you both talk a lot about acknowledging structural harm, and I'm going to take those learnings with me into the rest of my weekend, and I hope you have a happy and healthy one.
Thank you for listening. That was Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. To learn more about how we use brain and behavioral science to empower human rights defenders, find us at mindbridgecenter.org and follow us on social media.